All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started with the introductions. Welcome to The Burden and Resilience of Minority Mental Health with Dr. Nikhil Tomar. We are in a webinar format. What that means is that the chat or the unmuting options are not available to you. If you do have questions, you'll notice a Q&A tab in the bottom of your screen. Please put any questions in there and we'll keep an eye on those throughout the webinar. And I am going to now pass it over to our Deputy Director, Liz Hodgkins, to introduce Dr. Tomar.
Thank you so much, Meredith. I am really glad you are all here today joining us with Dr. Nikhil Tomar. He is the assistant professor at the University of New Hampshire, New Hampshire's Department of Occupational Therapy, and also serves as a NAMI New Hampshire Board of Directors and on the Access Committee. So Nikhil's research focuses on the better understanding and examining stigma related to mental health concerns and its effects on a variety of outcomes, such as mental health care utilization among various populations, such as those involved with the criminal justice system. His work has been published in top occupational therapy and interdisciplinary journals. He is actively engaged into interdisciplinary research and community-based projects exploring the role of OT in mental health care. And we are really grateful for Dr. Tomar joining us here today, and I am going to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm also thankful to NAMI New Hampshire for organizing this webinar, and also for everybody who I cannot see over here, but has taken time out of their busy schedules to discuss this or have this conversation. I'm going to share my screen, but the way I'm hoping that this could work is that I'll have a brief presentation, 15-20 minutes, and then we can just hopefully dive into the conversation with everybody else. Even during conversation, my preference is not to speak at people, but have a conversation with people. So the presentation has various participant quotes. I don't know how this will work, Liz, but I was hoping that somebody from the audience could say the quote or read the quote out loud. If that is not possible, then it would would you mind kind of going back and forth with it?
Sure.
Yeah, we can do it.
In the chat?
The quotes will be on the screen.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can see it. It's just like I said, I don't think how the attention span works for people when it's only my voice for 20 minutes.
Sure.
So, right. I'm gonna share my screen and hopefully this would work. All right, I'm hoping that this is working. Can everybody see? Okay, perfect. So, like we just kind of discussed, the title of the talk is The Burden and the Resilience of Minority Mental Health. And we'll just start from the get-go with the label of minority itself. I think this is a label that has been used for a long time. It does have value when you think about the proportion of US population only in terms of numbers. So for example, this is a graph of the changes in US population from 1990 to 2023. And as you can see, if you think about just purely in terms of numbers, then the label of minority kind of makes sense because as compared to white populations of, let's say, Hispanic individuals, Black individuals, or Asian individuals, they are lesser. So the idea that the group of individuals who constitute a lesser number of people in a population could be termed as minority makes some sense. But I think the numbers only convey part of the story. They're not the full story. They're rarely the full story. It matters, for example, how people are perceived by others and how they perceive themselves. So, for example, no two Hispanic individuals or Black individuals or white individuals are completely alike. So while the number gives some idea about the constitution of the population, it doesn't necessarily convey how people are perceived by others or how they are perceived by themselves. For example, I have these two quotes up here. Um, would either Liz or Mary, would you mind reading it?
Sure. I don't really have a home within the African American community. And even within the Latino community, we end up with subsets where I'm half Puerto Rican and half Dominican. So even within just the ethnicity of being Latina, that's a huge issue on its own.
So even with this first quote, we can see that it is very, very difficult to put this one respondent in any one neat category. So the idea of numbers doesn't necessarily, again, convey the whole story for this individual and the challenges that this individual has in terms of thinking about themselves and how they belong in various groups. So that first quote kind of really goes at the heart of how we perceive ourselves, but it also matters how we are perceived by others. Meredith, would you mind reading the bottom quote?
Sure. One of the biggest challenges I faced is if I get angry at any point in time, or if I show that I am displeased with something, I end up falling into the stereotype of the angry Black woman, and I'm seen as nothing else.
So these two quotes belong to the same interviewee. We can see, for example, her own perceptions about herself are highly complex. But if somebody else is seeing her in a negative light, then they're seeing her only as an angry Black woman. So again, for this person, the idea or grouping this person into just the category of Black or just the category of Latina does not reflect at all what her experiences are. And as these quotes kind of highlight that these are processes in terms of how we perceive ourselves, how we are perceived by others. So for rest of the talk, I'm not going to use the word minority, but the word either racialized individuals or people of color or communities of color, because that, in my view, conveys what the lived experiences of the people are and how they are perceived by themselves or by others. So now getting into the context of mental illness itself. So from various scientific accounts and studies, we know that the proportion of mental illness is higher among non-Hispanic white individuals, as this graph shows, or as this figure shows, as compared to the other groups. So for example, for non-Hispanic white population, the prevalence rate is around 1 in 5 individuals, whereas for other groups hovers somewhere around 1 in 6 or 1 in 7. Uh, but this prevalence rate hugely discounts one of the major things in this phenomenon, which is that many racialized individuals do not have access to care or do not utilize care. So, for example, Black or African American higher education students have 73% lower odds of being diagnosed as compared to other groups. Or Asian higher education students have 51% lower odds of accessing or utilizing therapy as compared to other groups. So if you just were to just look at the figure that is in front of us, it may seem like that the white non-Hispanic white individuals carry uh, the larger proportion of mental illness in the US society. But I think when we acknowledge the lack of accessibility and utilization within racialized populations, it is clear to see that much of the burden of unmet mental health concerns is carried by racialized individuals. So, and it's not just that the racialized individuals carry the burden in terms of care, where they are not able to access care or they are not able to utilize care. They also carry undue burden of stress factors in life. So initially or traditionally, mental illnesses have been thought of as an individual biological problem, as in somebody has um, uh, brain chemistry issues, biological issues that increases their risk for mental health concerns. However, in contemporary society, we know that both biological factors, environmental stressors, and individual psychology factors come together to either increase or decrease risk for mental health concerns for an individual. So if we think about in that manner about mental health specifically, then it's clear to see that the historical stigma of mental health, historical racism, does put racialized individuals into higher risk for experiencing mental health concerns. For example, this model was proposed by Anglin and colleagues in 2021, and it kind of lays out various factors that starts from the birth and goes on until the external factors in which a person lives in, which dictates very often the risk for mental health concerns for racialized individuals. I'm not going to go through all these factors, but just to kind of expand on this idea, if we just think about neighborhood level disadvantages, think about a Black or brown woman, for example, who have gone through college education but is living in an economically challenging neighborhood. She might not have access to employment. That can put her at risk for food insecurity, and that can significantly increase the risk for mental health concerns. So the burden that the racialized individuals are carrying are not just for lack of accessibility or utilization, but also the risk, the undue risk that they carry in terms of mental health challenges that arise from the stress factors that very often racialized individuals experience throughout their everyday lives. And uh, this quote kind of goes at the heart of what I'm trying to say, and it's said much better than I could ever say. I don't mind reading this. This Meredith, I'll go with it. So, quote: "The stigma of mental health is so great that it is just one more barrier for people of color to cross, to address in any way. Because I think that our burden is so heavy in that culturally many non-white cultures are hyper in the sense to even talk of mental health." I think this idea, the way the stigma of mental health permeates or works within the framework of race and ethnicity, is that historically mental health has been stigmatized for hundreds of years. And those uh, attitudes have seeped into across all cultures. However, when if we think from the viewpoint of racialized individuals, if you're living in a community where you know that based on your skin color or your accent or your nation of origin, for example, you will be stigmatized. And then you have stress factors that lead to risk, increasing in risk for mental health concerns. But you also know that mental illness itself is stigmatized. You don't want to carry both the burdens with yourself whenever you walk out the door or whenever you walk into a room. So in terms of priority, you know that you cannot change, for example, your skin color, you cannot change some of the biological factors, but you know what you can control? You can control that if you don't go to a psychiatrist's office, you're not going to get the diagnosis of mental illness on your medical records, which in turn, hopefully, um, will not limit your economic opportunities or your social opportunities. That's the burden that various racialized individuals have to carry, the negotiation between who they are and what their stresses are, and is it beneficial for them to access care, or would it be a social punishment or an economic punishment to actually get care? So in that's what this code is highlighting. This because of that stigma of both mental health and race ethnicity, many non-white cultures are not amenable to talking about mental health concerns generally. And we'll kind of go in this topic again. So both mental health and racial ethnic identity are guided by several factors. Uh, but I refrain from just telling people that life is complicated by many factors. I think everybody who lives life understand that life is complicated. So what I'm trying to do over here is that focus the conversation on three factors that very often guide experiences of mental health and race ethnicity for individuals, for racialized individuals. And those three factors are social network, identity, and care challenges. So in terms of social networks, one of the most interesting finding for me in this research was majority of the participants talked about experiencing stigma from within the families. Um, for example, Liz, Meredith, would you mind, any of you mind reading this quote?
Sure. If I share it with them, Americans, they understand better, probably because they might be going through it as well. If I think I've been like shamed too much for being mentally ill by my family to just like kind of announce it to the world or anything like that. Male Vietnamese American.
So this sentiment was communicated by various participants in the research that I've conducted so far, that the stigma is not coming from outside, but actually from within the family. And it's a very complicated issue because you can kind of discount this phenomena by saying that, you know what, maybe perhaps the parents in this case, or the family in this case, have lack of education about mental health, for instance, or because they stigmatize mental health, that's why they're doing that. So it is easy to kind of discount this whole phenomena based on those two ideas. But I think what is more resolute when thinking about this particular phenomena is there was a theory called theory of linked fate. It was proposed by a sociologist in 2020 and basically says that for racialized individuals, the way various groups operate is that their lives are very much joined with each other. So, for example, a better way to understand this phenomena of stigma within family is not through that families have lack of education or they stigmatize mental health because of malintent or negative intent, but I think about a family, for example, who are first generation immigrants who came in, for instance, in the country, and they had mental health struggles, but they knew at the time, let's say if you're talking about 1980s and 90s, the policies were only starting to take place where they can protect people who have mental illness from economic punishments or employment biases. And they kind of grew up in that environment where the mental illness is thought of as a mark of shame. And then you see second generation students or adolescents in contemporary society who want to go for care, but the family members will stigmatize mental illness, not because they have malintent, but because they're used to living in a world where if you add another mark of shame or another stigma to already stigmatized racial ethnic identity, then that becomes, as I mentioned earlier, a social punishment or an economic punishment. And they don't want that to happen to their kids or to their loved ones. So very often there's high stigma of mental illness within communities of color, not because of malintent, because of this idea of linked fate that we know what could happen in terms of social punishment and economic punishment, and we don't want you to go through it. So that's why we are going to try this iron fist approach to kind of stimulate mental illness so that you are not again experiencing any economic or social punishment. So that was a surprising finding in this research. The other factor, I think, is the idea of identity. We'll get into the codes in a few seconds, but I think a core point that I want to mention is that mental health, unlike physical health, is very much dependent on how we think about ourselves. A fracture on a hand is visibly fractured on a hand by whoever can see knows that this is a fracture. Whereas mental health concerns are invisible illnesses or invisible concerns. And they very much are guided by how we think about ourselves. For example, self-esteem, low self-esteem has a high relationship with the risk for mental health concerns. Um, so it matters how we, as an individual, think about ourselves, and that is where the issues of identities come at the forefront, specifically for racialized individuals. So, for example, I'm happy to read the first quote. Um, quote, that's a very hard question because people from my country, since we are the only ones who don't speak Spanish there, we never know how to classify ourselves. So I don't want to say Latino, but I think that's the closest one. So I'm kind of in a no man's land. This kind of quote highlights how in various spaces, let's say white or other diverse spaces, this particular individual could not figure out how to classify themselves, how to um, let others know who they are. And that led to a kind of identity negotiation on a daily basis. Now imagine having to do those negotiations on a daily basis by looking around the room, who you are with, who you're around, what kind of people are there in majority, for example, and then thinking about how you are going to navigate the room. If you are trying to do those identity negotiations on a daily basis, that small stress on a daily basis compounds into a large stress on a long-term basis, and that can lead to increased risk for mental health concerns. Uh, Similar thing with the second quote. I've had a lot of people identify me in different ways, depending on whether they were seeing me in a positive or negative light at the time. So again, you can see the identity negotiations that is being thought of, done by this female respondent who is African American slash Afro Latino, about which room she's walking in, how she's identified, how she's seeing it. And again, the point over here is that if we agree that the phenomena of mental health is intimately tied to how we perceive ourselves, how we perceived by others, then these identity negotiations on a daily basis can compound the risk that one has towards mental health concerns, and even their decision making regarding do they need to access should they access mental health care or not. The last factor I'll discuss is challenges in care. I know I've talked about accessibility and utilization at the beginning of this talk, but even when somebody has access to care, is utilizing care, it can be pretty difficult for the care to be effective, comprehensive in the long term. For example, uh, Liz, Meredith, would any of you mind reading the quote?
I can do it. Yep. Quote, I would like have these instances of like racism and I would be upset. But then he, mental health provider, would come back to me and be like, are you sure that's racism and not like prejudice? And I'm just like, are you serious?
So this was a quote by a female interviewee, East Asian, from East Asian uh, racial ethnic identity. And the challenges in care, even to this day, and I'm going to assume that for the uh, next multiple years, will still persist. The challenge over here is, again, thinking about the burden of care. We racialized individuals have challenges in terms of accessing care first. Then, when they get to care, when their lived reality is being discounted or being not acknowledged by the providers, then it's not likely that they're going to engage in care for a long term. Because imagine having to defend your reality from the person who is supposed to be providing care for the various negative experiences that you have on a day-to-day basis. So those challenges in care, they persist. They persist right now. I have a lot to say. I could say a lot about ideas regarding cultural sensitivity, those trainings, etc., but I'll reserve those for the later conversation. But the main idea over here is that challenges in care persist, not just in terms of accessing, but once you have accessed that care, how effective that care is going to be, and how your experiences as a racialized individual will be appreciated or not within the context of care itself. And I think the reason why I didn't want to have this talk just about the burden, it's because it's very often the lens that this phenomena is framed in. Um, but I think I'm conscious about the idea that all the factors that we just discussed, they can also lead to some resilience. For example, this was a model that was proposed by Neblet and colleagues in 2023. And you'll see over here, for example, this ERI represents ethno-racial identity, ethno-racial socialization, religiosity, spirituality, family and parenting. the same factors that we have discussed, like racial ethnic identity and family, they can also be factors for resilience. For example, if there's a parent, we were using the example of first and second generation immigrants, but if there is a first generation parent who is very have a positive outlook about their racial ethnic identity, understands the support that one can get through mental health care, then that can become a factor for resilience for the second generation immigrant kid, for example. It is very easy sometimes. I think the way our brains work is that it's easier if we had a set of factors which were risk factors, set of factors which benefits mental health. Then we can kind of tackle these factors separately. But in my work, listening to these stories, listening to these narratives, I have never found that the factors are neatly distributed in one bucket or the other. I think the factors that make our lives difficult can sometimes also be the factors that makes us resilient. Um, and this kind of quote goes into that idea. As we have talked about, the negotiations of ethno-racial identity can be very much burdensome for often for racialized individuals. However, it can also help somebody resist stigma. So, for example, in this quote over here, this is by a quote from a female interviewee who identified as Haitian, and she said, quote, being black is sometimes it's more like a confidence, like a boost, like, oh, I'm just a black girl, I'm going to speak up. So even though we have these stress factors from identity negotiations, over here you can see the opposite end of it, that the identity itself is becoming a factor of resilience. So when we think about the burden and the resilience of mental health for racialized individuals, it is critical to keep in mind that it's not based on factors, key correct factors that support or prevent mental health concerns or access to it, but the contextual nature of those. The same group of people can, for example, a conversation that comes to my mind is that this same respondent was talking about how when she's in Florida, she identifies herself as Haitian. And over there, her friends are not as amenable to mental health care. So when she moved to New Hampshire, because there is not a big group of Haitian community over here, she identified herself as Black. And over here, however, people were more amenable to mental health concerns. So she actually she was more comfortable accessing therapy in New Hampshire as compared to Florida at her own home. So it kind of gives us this picture of the contextual nature of these factors in dictating how, again, we'll perceive ourselves or others, and also how racialized individuals access or utilize care. So I think if I'm perfectly aware that not every word that I've said will land and be in the memory forever. So if there were a few takeaways from this brief talk, it's that I think narratives provide a meaningful context for the identities that often shape personal experiences and social rhetoric. I think when we just look at the racial ethnic groups purely from a numbers perspective, just looking at a graph on how population is changing, it's easier to discount the lived experiences. I think, but focusing on the narratives can give us a more clearer idea of how lived experiences and perspectives regarding mental health are shaped on a daily basis. The second is social networks, especially the close ones, often guide mental health care engagement decision making. For racialized individuals, often it's the closed networks that dictate if a person will feel stigmatized for mental health concerns or supported for mental health concerns and make a decision to then get care. As I was talking about in the example of um, the Haitian female Haitian interviewee, and how her decisions regarding getting care were different based on if she was in Florida versus in New Hampshire. And then the last point is that just getting to care or utilizing care for racialized individuals is not equal to comprehensive or effective care or relief from symptomatology. Uh, Again, people can get to care, but we know that there is higher rates of misdiagnosis among racialized individuals. We know there are other several disparities in terms of longevity of care, quality of care. So I think just getting to care is not enough. I think there's more research, more work that needs to be done in terms of how care could be comprehensive and effective for racialized individuals. I think, like I said, I'm not too big of a fan of just listening to my voice for a long time. So I think I'm just going to thank all the collaborators on this project and then open this up for a conversation.
And we have some questions that have been coming in, Dr. Tomar. So the first one, you did kind of answer this, but I just wanted to put it back out there in case there were additional things you wanted to talk about. Are there differences in experiences of stigma across racialized groups versus internal to a racial group? So I know,
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
have additional thoughts on that.
yeah. I'll try not to go into a lecture on this because it could turn into a long topic. So I think there are differences based. So let's think, we can think about stigma in two ways. One is public stigma, as in how, let's say, uh, Meredith, Liz, or Nikhil thinks about stigma coming from the community. So that's one. Then there is internalized stigma, as in, let's say, if a person A has depression, how they think about depression itself. So we know that in communities of color, there is high public stigma as compared to white populations, as in that communities of color perceive that there is more stigma from outside community towards them. And that is compounded by the factor that uh, on the background of it, they are not thinking of mental illness or mental health as purely mental illness and mental health, but also being black and brown and being mentally ill or having mental health concerns. So because of that compounding, there is perception from various communities of color that there is a higher public stigma in those communities. As compared to internalized stigma, there is some research that there is push and pull. I think I was mentioning that these are very context dependent factors. Push and pull between, let's say, if you have a strong racial ethnic identity for your own self, like if you think that being Asian or being Indian is a is a matter of pride, for example, then you can have a bit less of an internalized stigma versus if you don't think that your racial ethnic identity, if you think that your racial ethnic identity is less than other groups, then you might have higher internalized stigma. So I don't know if I'm answering the questions as clearly as I could, but I'm trying to not just give an answer that says that it's complicated, but I think it depends on which community we are talking about, how that community or individual thinks about their own racial ethnic identity, and based on that also what they think about how the public perceives them and what the public has in terms of stigma towards mental illness. Based on those factors, as one goes up and down, the others kind of follow along.
And the person who put in the question said, yes, that's exactly what I wanted to hear about. So yeah,
Okay.
sounds like you get the nail on the head. Another question, what can we do to support racialized groups experiencing stigma? And there's another question that follows asking about what educational institutions can do to support youth or young adults. So I'm wondering if you could maybe kind of look at this sort of from like the micro, meso,
Mhm.
macro level.
So the so if you look at the research on stigma, there are certain interventions for micro level. So for example, let's say it's assumed that, let's say, in a university setting, you can have training on mental health or an education format lecture on mental health. You come in and you give that lecture to, let's say, 100 students, and the hope is that because people have more knowledge about mental health, that the stigma will reduce. That is traditionally was thought of as a good intervention for stigma. Turns out it doesn't work in the long term. Turns out people forget things, and also it is very, very difficult to uh, take out deep rooted attitudes and beliefs that are at the back of our head just by one education session. So I think then there are other interventions also, for example, that person A who has depression will come to a class or a community. That person happens to be brown or black. They will speak to a room full of people who are black and brown about their experiences, and hopefully that will reduce stigma in those communities. Again, same kind of factor happens where that education may have limits, first that, and second, just like we have the model minority myth, where let's say if I say the word Asian or Indian, then people think of, let's say, highly educated, etc. Similarly, a person who's coming to give a lecture on depression after having lived through depression, they are thought of as somebody who has survived and thrived versus other parts of the population who have not done so. So even though people may not stigmatize the person in front of them, they might stigmatize others outside of the room, even though they have the same diagnosis. So in terms of intervention, um, there are some that work for some time for some people. So, for example, of lately, religious institutions have come into forefront in terms of providing access to care and also knowledge about mental health. But that works for some people at some point in some places, but it's not effective for everybody across time, across places. So I think research is still thinking about how to effectively reduce stigma and increase mental health care utilization for racialized individuals on a population level. We do not have anything on a population level, unfortunately. So that's just the micro level. On policy level, we have nothing. On policy level, there is no intervention which says that, you know what, if you do this, then the policies for mental health care will change. There is nothing of that sort. And I think it is, again, in my view, uh, the problem of stigma is a very contextual problem. So the way to kind of provide intervention for that depends on what the context is. So, for example, if we talk about education session specifically for racialized students on our university campus, you will need to provide that intervention every year, if not every semester, just to kind of reinforce the idea of mental health, reinforce the idea of how bad stigma could be uh, um for an individual. If you do that on a regular basis on a university campus, yes, stigma is likely to reduce. Um, but when it comes to on a policy level, how to institute that, university officials have their own. Uh, I remember when I was doing this research, I proposed to my one of my alma maters to have a tab of mental health on their homepage, and they didn't want to do that because they didn't want the university to be associated with mental health, for example. So lots of barriers, not clarity in interventions so far. Uh, so unfortunately, no intervention that works for everybody all the time at all places. But there are some interventions, let's say religious engagement, education, that may work in some places, some time for some people.
Thank you. So next question. As a current LMHC student and Latina, I find it very challenging to find diverse providers in New Hampshire. I'm not suggesting clients should only see providers with the same background, but shared lived experience can be very beneficial. Are there any initiatives in New Hampshire higher education or at the state level to promote the development of more diverse providers?
Uh, in my knowledge, no. So, so we are talking about, let's say, there are a few things that come to my mind. First is that to begin with, New Hampshire does not have enough mental health care providers, period. So the overarching strategy for the state is to uh, provide funding and education to health sciences students who can then get training in mental health and will choose to stay in New Hampshire so that they can provide care. So that's the first thing, that we just don't have enough mental health care providers, unfortunately, in the state to cater to the needs that we have. First, that. Um, Second, I think uh, I try to tread the boundary of just increasing diversity in profession doesn't mean that the needs of a population will suddenly go away. Because I also think about the practitioners. So, for example, imagine a practitioner who is Ladina, who is seeing a lot of people who are black or brown from various racial ethnic makeup, and that practitioner is hearing constantly about the negative experiences regarding race that the clients, for example, experience. That itself is a lot of negative burden for the practitioner themselves. So I think I try to be conscious, saying that just because there should be a shared understanding, but also I am cognizant of the burden that the practitioner might carry when they are providing care to a population in need for a lot of people across a lot of time. So I also hope that uh, the education itself in medical communities goes to a place where the emphasis is not just on reducing symptomatology, but understanding narratives, understanding what the life experiences are, uh, practitioners who are cognizant of the life experiences of the people who are in front of them, and then are able to provide comprehensive and quality care. That. Uh, so I think those two factors come to my mind. And in terms of, again, going back to the question about what the state is doing, I know state has programs on increasing the number of mental health care professionals in the state, but they have not uh, uh, carved out like specific programs for, unfortunately, for racialized individuals. So I think I'm hoping that various people sign up, that the cohort of the health professionals itself is diverse enough that we can have various mental health care professionals who are racially and ethnically diverse and can provide care to such a population also.
Thank you. And there's some questions in here about, what educational institutions can do to support mental health of their, folks who are identify in groups of color.
I think a lot of things, and some things are also happening. So, for example, uh, just at UNH, UNH has Beauregard Center, which specifically works with students from various marginalized communities. And that center puts up various events that are catered for either towards various racialized individuals or groups, or towards mental health, specifically for racialized groups. But again, on a universal level, there is not an agreed upon intervention that can be implemented by education institutions everywhere, which can lead to positive outcomes for every student who attends that. So that universal intervention is lacking. What Because the problem is contextual, my work in this area has led me to believe that any educational institution who's trying to address these critical problems have to first go to the people who experience these problems, ask them what works best for them, and then implement those care practices in collaboration with those individuals. I think while there can be various answers to what we can do, I know there is one specific answer on what education institutions should not do, which is that just come up with a strategy by themselves and implement that in hopes that the problems will dissipate. That is not bound to happen. So I think the better approach is to, from the ground up, that you meet with the students who have such concerns, you work with them, you collaborate with them to establish care resources for people in such educational institutions.
Thank you. So this question's, could you speak to any narrative themes you've heard from racialized young adults who've been justice involved while also navigating mental health conditions?
So I have worked in with the mental health at the intersection of justice system and mental health at the intersection of the higher education, but I've never met or interviewed somebody who has had engagement with both. Uh, and there, I can conjecture on why that might be the case, but I won't do that over here. Uh, uh, I have not done that, but I think I can speak where on this side of my work, where I have interviewed people who have mental health concerns and have engaged with the justice system and have had higher education. I think it goes back to this idea of social factors. Uh, the idea of criminality is often thought of again as a personal action that somebody chose to engage in criminal behavior. That is often not the case. I think the people that I've met who have gone through higher education and eventually, as they age older, they have experienced engagement with the justice system. Also, their case wasn't that they intentionally harmed somebody. It was that they were hungry, so they took a loaf of bread from a grocery store and police was called. Or that their roommate said that they had stolen something, but they had not, and the complainant basically said that they stole something and they were threatening to harm me because they have mental illness, but police cannot verify the veracity of the stories. But again, because the idea of harm was in place, the person was sent to a justice system. So I think in this scenario, what I often think about is mental health seen in light of criminality, which is then seen in light of personal action. I think that puts a lot of risk for racialized individuals. We know, for example, um, that in the US justice system, there is overrepresentation of racialized individuals in prisons and jails. But again, it's not because that somehow racialized individuals are more prone to violence. It's just because if you're thinking about social factors, if you're living in a neighborhood which is economically struggling, you have education, but you cannot get employment, and you also have to feed yourself, and then you take a loaf of bread from a grocery store, but police is called. So I think it's a lot of factors that coming into play in kind of dictating how the engagement with justice system will go. A huge problem that I don't think I can solve or speak at length right now.
Thank you. So I wanted to, kind of as we near the end of this conversation, I wanted to kind of bring it back to some of the resilience and hope that you mentioned. So the first question I have for you about that is, in your research and everyday interactions with young adults, what struck you about the resilience of those folks as they've been navigating mental illness?
Yeah. I think that the the previous generations had to figure out what mental health care would even look like while they were dealing with heightened stigma that was conveyed to them in various contexts. So when we think about younger population, I think one thing that is helpful is that the mental health care system itself is evolving a bit, slowly and slowly, to a place where people can get some care. What does give me hope is that if we go, I think, 2 or 3 decades back, you cannot walk into a like, let's say, a student gathering and just have a conversation on mental health. Right now, you can. I am astounded by the amount of events that happen on a campus regarding mental health, the amount of knowledge that students have about mental health on college campuses, or even in high school, among high school students, for example. And they're not afraid to uh, reach out for care, I think. They're not afraid to reach out for care. They're not afraid to share their experiences with other students or other loved ones, for example. Um, I think that's what gives me hope, that they're less ashamed of it. I think in the past, generations have been more ashamed of mental health concerns than the current generation. So I think I would say that is helpful, because if you think about stigma, that's what stigma does primarily. It basically puts shame on something that you're experiencing. But if you're not ashamed by it, then you can overcome it. So I think that's what's hopeful to me for the young generation.
Um, so one last question. I know we have some other questions, but we are running out of time, and so I don't know if I can get to everything, unfortunately, folks, because this is probably a conversation we could have for lots of hours. But I did want to just ask again one more question about hope as we, kind of wrap up today. So when you think about hope for the future of New Hampshire specifically, do you have some other thoughts around that?
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. I think two things. First, I think when I first moved to New Hampshire, I moved here in 2018. And I think the way it looked to me in 2018 is not the way I look at it right now, which is to say that I see a lot of diversity in the state, a lot of acknowledgement of the understanding or the burden that people carry who happen to be racialized individuals. Like if this was 2020 and you would tell me that in 2026 there'll be a talk about NAMI New Hampshire about burden and resilience of mental health. I'm like, no, what are you talking about? I think, but we are at this moment, I think, having this conversation. So that is hopeful that slowly and slowly things are moving in the right direction. Um, First that, and second, I think I still remember when I first moved to the state, the DHHS commissioner at the time had, I think, a 10-year mental health plan. And in that plan, he specifically charted out strategies for or call to address stigma so people can access care. And I think while these things have been paused or policies take time to change, I think just seeing that a state health commissioner is putting stigma as one of the factors that the state has to address so that more people can get care was very reassuring. Even today, I think there is a rural health grant initiative where the state has gone and I think more than $200 million. And in that grant, there are specific talks about mental health for people who are living in areas where they do not necessarily have access to it. So that's again hopeful. So I think I tend to think of hope not just in one day at a time, but also in the long run. I think uh, the challenges and care that we mentioned or discussed today, I'm hoping that they won't be the set of challenges or the number of challenges will decrease in 10 years from now. And that's what it seems like. And I think even thinking about Nami's work in day boarding, for example, that again, when I came in 2018, the number was in 30s. Now we are talking about single digit numbers. That again kind of speaks to what NAMI New Hampshire's work has been to contribute on how the state's policies will go, how state can better equip itself to uh, address the challenges that people face when they have mental health struggles. So uh, I think to kind of uh, put a book end to this conversation, I think NAMI gives me hope just by seeing the work that it has done across the years in the state and continues to do so.
Thank you. So this has been a really wonderful conversation. And as I said a few moments ago, I'm sure we could keep talking about it. There were some additional questions. And so I wanted to let folks know, we have been recording this presentation. And so we will be sending, you out access to it. You'll be able to find it. It'll be living on our NAMI YouTube page as well. It can sometimes take a week or two before it lands there. But we will do our best. I'll check with Dr. Tomar and see if we can get some answers to some of the questions that we weren't able to get to. And again, everybody had lots of really wonderful questions, but unfortunately just not enough time. Oh, and it looks like Dr. Tomar has shared his email address as well. So thank you very much. You can certainly reach out to him directly. As I mentioned, we will be sending you out notice that this has, gone live. You will also get a survey from us that will come out via email, usually within about 24 hours. But we thank you so very much for joining us today. And for coming to listen to this talk. And Dr. Tomar, we thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And really, I loved how your focus on narratives and context, because I think so frequently we look for these very specific answers. We want to put things in boxes and we want you to say, not you specifically, but we want people to say, do this, do that. This is the right thing. This is the wrong thing. And that's not how humans are built. And we're never going to be in a place, no matter how much better improved we make our mental health and other systems, right, where we're going to be able to say, for this population, always do this, because we're all unique. And I love that you really, shared those stories and those quotes and really just brought that alive in this conversation. So thank you so much for your time. And again, thank you to everyone for joining us. And we'll look forward to hopefully seeing you again at a future webinar. Take good care.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for organizing this. And again, thank you for everybody who took the time out of their busy schedules to have this conversation. So thank you.